The House Oversight Subcommittee on Corporate Subsidies and State Investments will come to order. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Cara.
Here.
Representatives Green, Bierlein.
Here.
Wagella.
Here.
Pahutsky.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 4 members present. You do have a quorum.
Representative Bierlein moves to approve the minutes of the January 28th meeting. Without objection, so ordered. Today we will be continuing our discussion on data centers. First we'll be hearing from Dr. Ben Green, Assistant Professor of the School of Information at the University of Michigan. Welcome, Dr. Green, and we look forward to your testimony.
Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to be here. I'm Ben Green. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Michigan in the School of Information, also in the School of Public Policy. I'm here to share some of my research about data centers and particularly the impacts of data centers on the communities that they are placed in. So let's see if I can. We are now about 1 year out from the Michigan passing the expanded tax breaks for data centers, and we have seen an incredible boom of data center plans and growth in Michigan. And there we go. With many big developments across the state. And this has gotten a lot of public attention from residents across Michigan and a, to me, quite remarkable and surprising amount of pushback. You know, a year ago, this was a topic that many people were not focused on. And now we've seen organizing and heated debate and lots of resistance in communities across the state. Just earlier this week, the Wall Street Journal reported on organizing in Howell to push back on one of the data center plans there. And we can get a sense of the types of concerns that residents have from this photo from a protest that was here in Lansing in December. Concerns that are critical of AI in general, issues of environmentalism, planet over profit, and concerns broadly about how the public is being treated with respect to these companies, right? People over profit, people over corporations. And so a lot of my research sets the stage for these concerns by analyzing what are the harms that data centers bring to communities, and I would say justifying many of the concerns that these individuals are bringing through this resistance across the state. So I wanted to just dig in on a few of these major issues that to talk about. So broadly, the rise of data centers require incredible amounts of electricity, and this is straining the power grid in the regions where data centers are located. Many regions are finding that they are running out of power. There is simply not enough power to meet the demand of these planned data centers. And one of the biggest ways that this is hitting the average resident of states is that it is leading to increased utility costs. Many major newspapers and researchers have looked into this and found a consistent pattern of data centers leading to higher utility costs in regions where there is heavy data center activity. And this is one of the major concerns that residents across Michigan are organizing against. Here is a analysis from a researcher at Yale, just showing the difference in how electricity prices are changing for residents versus data centers. Electricity prices are rising faster for consumers than commercial settings like data centers, where residents have seen since 2022 a 10% increase relative to just a 3% increase for data centers. And often data centers are signing deals with utility companies and states for discounted utility rates, which is just one of the reasons why many of the costs associated with the electricity demand of data centers are being not paid by the data centers themselves, but are being passed on to consumers in the form of higher electricity prices. What this means often in terms of the electricity demand is that the rise of data centers is leading many regions to keep coal and other fossil fuel plants open for longer beyond planned shutdowns. We've seen a number of states like in Nebraska, where data centers came in. They created this incredible surge in demand for electricity, and the only way that the region could meet that demand was to keep coal plants open that had been previously planned for a shutdown. So thinking about Michigan, this raises the potential of triggering the off-ramp to the state's climate plan if so many deals are signed for data centers that the state can no longer meet this demand through renewable energy and has to do an off-ramp from the state's ambitious climate plan. And I think this is an important point to think about when we're thinking about the rise of data centers in Michigan, to not just look at individual plans where you can take one city or township's plan at a time, but to look at the state level. We need to be thinking about not just whether in a one-off sense, a utility provider could handle a single data center, but whether the collective amount of electricity and water demand from all of the data centers being planned would actually be feasible for us to handle. And so this is also triggering concerns for grid operators that they are going to simply not, particularly in moments of peak demand, such as extreme weather, when there's severe needs for heating or cooling, that there simply won't be enough power to handle everyone, and they'll need to move towards rolling blackouts, or the grid will simply be overstrained. One of the issues of data centers is that they expect to have be operational 24/7, have about 5 minutes of downtime over the course of an entire year. So these are not facilities that are welcoming to the idea of in a particularly hot or cold period where the grid is strained. They are not interested in shutting down to make sure that people can keep their heating or cooling on. But this is a severe issue that some regions have already started to have debates about and concerns about that are further ahead in having more data centers. And a lot of data centers have been justified over the last year and before that by this idea that it is bringing economic development in the form of jobs, and this simply does not occur. Data centers do create construction work. There are real jobs associated with that, but that is a short-lived activity. Once a data center is operational, there are often 25 to 50 people who are actually working at that facility. So this is not a form of sustainable job creation for a region or a state. We can see this from the state's experience with the Switch data center in Grand Rapids, which is now 8 to 10 years old, and came in with promises of creating 500 to 1,000 jobs and has created on the order of 25 to 50 jobs over the course of its time here. And researchers have looked at the tax breaks specifically, which many states have for data centers, and shown that these are endangering state budgets. States are losing, there are about a dozen states that are losing at least $100 million a year in terms of tax breaks for data centers. And this is also making it hard for states to plan because their estimates of how much revenue they are losing to these tax breaks has been changing quite rapidly. So it is also not just reducing revenue, but also harming their ability to make clear plans for what their budgets are going to look like in the near and medium future. So to summarize my research in terms of some policy conclusions, I'll speak first about the tax breaks, which simply put, my research indicates are just bad deals for states and for citizens. They are providing a benefit to data centers and tech companies, which are some of the wealthiest companies led by some of the most wealthiest executives in the world, at the expense of the public, consumers, and the environment. And so I think states with these tax breaks would benefit from simply removing them, which would help to equalize the costs and benefits of data centers, making it harder for data center companies to pass these costs off to consumers. It would honor the public sentiment regarding data centers in the state of Michigan, and would just slow down this data center boom and allow it to occur, allow data center development to occur at a hopefully more sustainable pace where the state and communities can make more reasoned decisions about it. in a separate category beyond the tax breaks, not necessarily mutually exclusive, is what are the types of things that states can do to regulate data centers? Whether or not there is an incentive in terms of taxes, there are a number of things that states can do to help ensure that data centers are good members of the community and actually contribute to the state. Transparency is, to me, a bare minimum requirement where data centers should be reporting how much energy and water that they are consuming. There is really no public benefit to this information being a secret. Ratepayers should be protected against cost increases, such that data centers are paying for the infrastructure upgrades, not receiving discounted energy rates. And one thing to be concerned about that I think does not get enough attention is the risk of what happens if a data center gets built, all of this energy infrastructure gets created, but then the data center doesn't actually become operational, or the company doesn't have the money to function, and the state could be left with all of this infrastructure it has to pay for, this massive stranded asset. And so that's something, again, to be thinking about in terms of the finances of data centers. Local community voice is incredibly important, and we've seen many fights across the state where communities are trying to push back and feeling like they don't have agency to do so. And I think it's important, again, to think about data centers from a statewide planning and coordination level, not just relying on individual townships to or allowing utilities to say we can handle each individual data center. But I think we should be commissioning studies at the state level to understand what is our collective capacity for data centers. How much electricity and water demand can we handle as a state from data centers, and allow that to help inform the statewide growth rather than simply hoping that each individual one will be handled. So those are some of the main conclusions from my research of the tactics that states can use to bring data center growth under control and ensure that when data centers come, if they do, they are working for the benefit of the public and the environment rather than the other way around. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Green, for your testimony. You mentioned earlier about discounted utility rates. Do you have any specifics, for example, on what type of deal they might get?
There are often known as, and I'm not sure specifically in Michigan what's been the case, but in many regions, I think like bulk purchasing agreements, where they are, where data centers are making deals for discounted energy rates. And one of the issues is sometimes these deals are actually in secret. There's a lot of secret contracts and non-disclosure agreements that are meant to kind of shield some of these. But the main piece of research on this is a group of research by at Harvard Law School in their environmental clinic have done some research on these secret agreements. And so that would be the best place to look. I'd be happy to share that document.
Sure, and if this was just a pure private sector operation where they got a discounted rate, but they didn't have sales and use tax exemptions, there was no investment requirement from the taxpayers of Michigan, and they wanted to work with another private sector company to negotiate a better deal based on bulk, would that make more sense? But given that they have the taxpayer assistance, there should be a heightened level of transparency around the dealings that they have?
Yeah, I mean, I think that especially when there is a tax, anytime, if there's a tax incentive, then I think that is kind of behooves the state then to place strong requirements to say, we are giving you this benefit. Here is what would justify it. We are expecting both, some form of economic development, but also that you're not harming the public in the process. So I think a tax incentive is a particularly strong reason to be putting strong requirements in place. But we're dealing with utility companies where, I guess my understanding of kind of the public-private divide here, but they're not entirely private companies. They are subject to state regulation. And so I think that is still a case where even without the tax break, I think it's very reasonable for the state to, make sure that ratepayers are protected against, the company just kind of signing agreements and allowing those costs to be passed off, because there's just a real disparity in power and agency here, right? A data center company can have their lobbyists, they can go to the utility company and, walk away. They have strong bargaining power, whereas, individual consumers, it's hard for them to know what's going on, especially this is, again, where the transparency is important. Often these deals are happening in secret, but even individual consumers, it's much harder for them to negotiate these deals. So I think it's important for the state to, try to protect them from the utility giving preferential treatment to, a large company that has more resources to just have those conversations and provide the lobbying.
And who do you believe benefits most from the sales and use tax exemptions for data centers? Is it the data centers themselves, the local community, taxpayers at large? Who benefits?
I would say the data centers themselves. They are directly saving money, and I don't think there's that much that they are doing in response to those incentives. So I think really they're getting a discounted taxes. They're getting the benefit.
Thank you. Next question from Minority Vice Chair Wigella.
First off, thanks for being here and thanks for your research. Actually, spent some time reading it last night. But a running theme in our committee has been learning about all the different places in Michigan where corporations have worked out deals for projects behind closed doors, and you were just talking about this. But in many of these communities, leaders sign NDAs for these to learn about these projects, and Chair Cara and I have introduced legislation at the state level preventing legislators from signing NDAs for legislation we're working on here, and Rep. Miller has introduced a bill that would ban it locally. But can you just talk a little bit more about what you've seen in your research and how these NDAs are a problem for the people of Michigan, but also how it's eroding public trust with governmental institutions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what these contracts are doing, there's a number of ways that this is coming up. First is that often by the time the public actually finds out about a data center plan, that plan is so far in the works. And we saw this. So, it can feel hard to push back when it's not just, oh, this is under negotiation, we're considering this, but, often the township or city has already signed a deal with the data center. So that's just the first thing. By the time the public finds out, they're already kind of on the back foot. They're already operating on kind of losing terrain here. Another aspect of the secrecy is that it can be hard to know who the actual tech company, like who the data center is for. There are these intermediaries that are often the named entities on these contracts. And then it's not clear which tech company is involved, right? We saw that in Saline. It took a long time before it became clear that OpenAI was involved. And in Howell, there was one of the big questions was who is actually going to be involved in this? And I think it's either Microsoft or Meta. I forget which of those has been confirmed to be engaged there. So again, the public is skeptical of data centers for some of the very material reasons that I was describing. And so this lack of transparency is adding to this sense that these entities are not coming to be good neighbors. They are coming to take our resources, not give us jobs, and just get our tax breaks. So the lack of transparency then contributes to feeling that the process is not inclusive. And even then later down the line, many of the contracts have been heavily redacted. I think the Saline OpenAI contract, when that was released, there was huge amounts of redactions in there again. So it's hard for the public to trust it, not just because they don't have information, but because they're seeing entities coming in that are seemingly acting in shady ways. And so that naturally raises your antenna to say, well, why can't they just tell me what the terms of the deal are? Why can't they just tell me how much electricity or water they plan to use, unless they think that those are going to make us more upset?
Next question from Representative Bierlein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to wrap my head around, I think there are a couple different opinions just even at the table about how taxes work. So like as a business, if you pay taxes, is that part of your operating expense? Like you're
yeah.
going to build that into the price of the product you sell.
Yes.
And so we're talking about tax breaks that it only benefits the business, but it absolutely, like the less taxes a business pays, the less overhead they have into their product. So as we're sitting here, like people at home are streaming this session through a data center, we have to make a choice about whether or not we want technology or we don't want technology. And we're debating a tax code. So if it's a sales tax on the materials and the use and everything, we either believe that taxes are a burden to business or they're not. And we fight every day about whether or not we should be raising tax code or lowering tax code. And now we're saying, well, it's bad today, but tomorrow I'm definitely going to not want to charge taxes to this business. And so I'm confused at the premise of when it's good and when it's bad. And I think there are very real things that we should be talking about when it comes to data centers, like energy usage and water usage, that are not part of the tax code. So I'm curious as to the operating expense piece of this and how, if it's only benefiting the business today, how when we lower business taxes for somebody tomorrow, that's not a benefit to the people.
Yeah, if I could just add a few responses. I mean, I think that tax breaks became part of the conversation when the state passed a tax break specifically targeted for data centers. And I think that one of the questions I believe, taxes are a part that everyone plays a role in contributing back to the state and to their community in the form of taxes. And breaks should be a reflection of a particular incentive. Do we want to contribute to a particular, we think that a particular business or entity or activity is contributing back to the state. And I do not believe that that is the case with data centers. And one of the things with data centers is that they're not bringing that type of local benefit that you might expect of another business where there would be a tax break. They're not bringing significant numbers of jobs. They're not bringing economic activity in the state. It's not even the case that a data center in Michigan is necessarily benefiting the people of Michigan, even in terms of their access or rates for AI services or technology services, right? Because this is part of these centers are connected to a global cloud network. So data centers in Michigan doesn't necessarily mean that the people of Michigan will get better services or rates. And I would say that these companies, if we're thinking about, what are the types of businesses that we want to help get off the ground and make sure that they are able to do business because we think there's a benefit to the state. These are the wealthiest companies in the world. The people leading these companies are the wealthiest people in the world. So it's hard for me to sit here and feel that it is justified, given all of these different costs and benefits, that they actually need these benefits. They are putting trillions of dollars of their of investment into data centers, and so they're very happy to receive the benefit. But I don't think that they would not be pursuing these data centers. And you want to make sure that the costs, again, are not being passed off to the public when these companies simply do not need it the way that perhaps other companies, it's creating a real ability for them to operate where they otherwise would not be able to.
I just don't see how there's a different, like if we believe that we shouldn't charge taxes to businesses because it's a pass-through, then it doesn't stop based on the amount of investment. We say a lot, like businesses don't pay taxes, but they pay taxes, but it's an operational expense. It automatically is passed off through the cost of their product to the consumer of the product. And we are all utilizing the technology that goes through a data center on a daily basis. And then I would just like to see if you could verify, you mentioned 25 to 50 employees at the Switch Center. My understanding through the last MEDC audit that they had over 500 badged employees there. So if we could just verify that information.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's been some changes in terms of how employees are calculated. So, at one point there was a question of, I think it was in 2022, one of the state councils looked at this and they found that the original agreements were full-time employees with benefits, with high wages, something pegged to the median regional wage. That was where they had only achieved about 26 employees at that time. And then I know that there was a recategorization from, I think, MEDC around what could count, and that bumped them up to 800 something. But a lot of those workers were contractors who worked limited time and often for relatively low wages. So it a little bit depends on how you calculate it. But I think if you actually go based on the original terms of the agreement, that number is on the order of 25 to 50, not several hundred.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
All right, next question from Vice Chair Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so we have a couple things happening here because we're talking about taxes, and then I know we're going to address citing, which are two very different things. And I just, for the sake of the order, just want to clarify that Michigan sales tax and use tax is structured to avoid double taxation. So we passed Public Act 181 last year that aligned data centers with how manufacturing, agriculture, and other industrial companies are already treated. So servers, cooling equipment, power systems are treated as production inputs and not consumer goods. So that's consistent with Michigan's long-standing tax policy for the other industries that we have. So it's not capital equipment, that produces services. So because without this, then we would be taxing them multiple times and we would be becoming non-competitive. So I just want to clarify that it's not a refundable credit, grant, cash incentive. It's a tax structure correction. So there's a lot of confusion about Public Act 181. And so I just want to, that's in one spot. Now, citing is a whole other question and ball of wax, because especially I'm a huge local control person and I want to support my local municipalities with what they want and their community and not. So we need to separate the argument of the taxes versus the citing. Because so I do have a question for you, sir, because it's interesting that U of M is actually actively working on putting a data center, which, because they're also a university system, they actually don't have to go through all the normal typical channels. So it's kind of interesting to see, and I actually enjoy it that there's differing views. But are you opposed to data centers in principle, or are you opposed to the specific citing issues?
Yeah, so first, I'm here representing purely my own views and research, not the university or the university's interests in the data center in Ypsilanti. So, that is not a project that I am personally involved in or supporting in any direct way. It's not simply a matter of citing. It's a matter of, I think that is a piece that I think can affect the impacts of data centers. But to me, it is about what are the benefits and costs that data centers are bringing to the communities and the states that they are located in. And my research indicates that data centers tend to be bringing in much more imposing issues. They are essentially, gaining access to the land, the water, the electricity, and externalizing many of the costs of their business onto consumers through higher rates, through environmental costs, and then citing is a piece of that, which often then leads to noise pollution and light pollution and disruption for people who are located close by. But my concern is not simply tied to citing, but is tied to the broader burdens that data centers are bringing to the communities. But I'm not sure I fully understand.
Well, I guess, are you opposed to manufacturing then in general? Because I think of like a Ford plant, any type, a pot plant. There's all kinds of things that don't benefit society, but we live in a capitalist country. And so I guess just to pick a winner or a loser in particular and to point out data centers is an interesting conversation. And that's why I know you're not talking about citing, but I actually believe that's the most important issue here is citing. Because, they're a company, they can exist. We have a huge Amazon facility, and I order Amazon every day, so I'm glad that there is one close by to me, and it produces noise, and it has traffic, and I have a Ford plant close by, and it makes cars. Well, actually, now it's shuttered, so I'd love for it to be a data center. So Ford out there, make that plant a data center. Okay, but I guess with that, what conditions would be acceptable to you, or do you just not think we should have data centers at all?
Well, I think maybe first the examples you were giving of Amazon and Ford are useful in that having those plants nearby are bringing more clear, tangible benefits to the community, right? Those plants are often hiring hundreds or thousands of people. They are creating boosting the economy in a meaningful way. There is real economic development through jobs and investment and secondary economic activity that, say, a Ford plant is creating, that is very different than a data center that does not hire people, is not creating lots of statewide economic activity. So I think that is a meaningful distinction here. And I would say the types of things, recommendations that I have on this final slide here are the types of policies or conditions that I think would make me feel more comfortable with data centers coming to my community or to the state of Michigan, where there's more transparency about understanding what are they actually doing, what rates are they paying. There's more local control in terms of being able to actually say, we do or we do not want this data center in our community. I mean, we've seen across Michigan, not just residents feeling that they trying to push back against data centers, but even city councils or township boards feeling like they can't fight back. I mean, in Saline, it wasn't that a bunch of people wanted it, a bunch of people didn't want it. There was debate and the pro side won out. The township collectively decided, both individuals and the township board, that they didn't want it, and then they got sued and didn't really have a choice. So again, that to me, I mean, if a township is excited about it and they can set terms that say, here's what we want you to do, here are the conditions of payments or taxes or the environment, and we're happy with that, I would feel okay with that. But in a case where they're getting kind of run over by these large companies, then I feel quite uncomfortable with it, because they are clearly uncomfortable with it.
Well, and I agree with you, because transparency is imperative, not signing NDAs. No elected official should ever sign an NDA. And that's why I guess I want to keep focused on citing. But I don't agree with you, though, on the premise that it doesn't impact the economy. I mean, we're using data centers for storage, for processing, for the global economy, for any type of EDI transaction that happens online. That it supports the POS systems. It supports, I mean, any type of commerce is ran through a data center. So I don't necessarily agree with you that I think that's actually a false premise, that it doesn't support the economy. And I guess and that's why I just wanted, as we're navigating through data centers, the most imperative thing is the siting. And I guess I just don't want you to lose focus on that, because when you start doing some intellectual speak, it confuses the situation. And data centers are important. I mean, do you have a cell phone?
I do, yes.
You store pictures on it?
I do, yeah.
So, I mean, I probably have 40,000 pictures of my dogs on my phone, which is stored probably in the cloud somewhere, which is in a data center. But I do, and that's why I guess I just don't want to lose the focus of the siting. I also don't necessarily agree with the premise that the energy issue. We do have protections actually in Public Act 181. They cannot get those tax credits unless they are energy, it cannot impact the local community. It cannot impact the water. They have to go from a municipal source that has to be approved by the local government. And so I just, as we are talking about data centers and navigating through this, we need to make sure that conversation and the message is very clear, because if we just get this whole mantra of I hate data centers, then and we don't have them at all, our economy can collapse, our society collapse, and we don't have technology or medical innovation at all. So I just, as a professor and expert, I ask you to be cautious in what you say, please.
So if I could just quickly clarify two things. I mean, in terms of economic activity, I think there's a question of how much of that economic activity is benefiting the state. As opposed
They
to
still
other
have to build it, and it takes,
They do.
I mean, some of them take 10 to 15 years to build, and so they're going to have the union workers, non-union workers, builders, electricians, HVAC people. I mean, so there will be a significant impact to the economy. While it may not be long-standing, but there are a lot of people in the IT fields and security fields who will also protect those facilities as well.
I think in terms of the question of, to me, the question is not there should be 0 data centers, it's not a binary question. It's more about the scale of development. What we're seeing right now is a planned build out of data centers that is far beyond what we actually need as a society. Technology companies driven by a desire for pushing generative AI technologies into more smartphones, across all facets of the world, every sector, are planning to build these massive hyperscale data centers in the expectation that they will be able to use it for these technologies. And yet, actually, there are many questions about how useful those technologies actually are, whether this scale of data center development is even necessary. Industries are finding that they're trying to use generative AI and actually not finding it that helpful. There are concerns about the data center development being overextending these technology companies, leading the economy into a bubble because of all of the capital expenditure that's being pushed. So it's not a question of saying we should eliminate all data centers, we should never build data centers. It's a matter of the scale of development is both overextending, I think from my research, overextending the state, but also is not actually necessarily needed for the economy. Or for...
Isn't that for the free market to determine, though?
Well, but the state is making decisions about how to tax and regulate.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Green. I have one last question for you, and then a brief question from Minority Vice Chair Wagella, and then we'll close with that. My question for you first is, why do you believe the German Energy Efficiency Act is a preferred policy model?
Yeah, so in my report, we highlight the German Energy Efficiency Act. I don't think that captures everything, and I think that since my report came out about 7 or 8 months ago, there's been more details. But I think that act is the most robust in terms of the energy components of data centers by requiring high energy efficiency standards, energy efficiency audits, requires data centers to rely on renewable energy and actually provide renewable energy to meet the demand that they're creating, because you don't want a situation where data centers are on renewable energy, but then they just push consumers off of renewable energy. So at the state level, they're still creating demand for non-renewable energy. So the German Act is quite strong in terms of those requirements. I don't think that act covers a lot of these other elements that I talk about, that I've talked about today, that I've talked about on this slide in terms of the cost sharing element and the transparency element. So I think it doesn't cover those things. So I don't think there's a single act or policy out there in the world that says like this is a model bill, but there are many out there to kind of say covering bits and pieces that I think are important, and there's been increased over the last 6 months, increased reporting and guidance on what are the types of considerations that regulations should be thinking about.
And just quickly on that, do you have any details in terms of ratepayers and how the rates may have gone up, and what would be said to be the cause for rates going up for ratepayers in recent years prior to a data center coming into a community?
No, I don't think I have a direct answer to that.
Okay, but are rates going up substantially for ratepayers?
Rates have been going up generally for ratepayers across the country, but what the research has shown is that is particularly acute in regions with more data centers. So like in the Mid-Atlantic, Virginia is the kind of center of data center growth. That's where you've seen some of the highest increases. So the rate of increase is definitely tied to data center density.
Okay, thank you. Next question and last one, if you'll be quick, please. Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
Yeah, so I think just first grounding in that we're not just talking about all data centers everywhere, because data centers have been around. We're talking about hyperscale AI data centers, which is a different animal. And to me, it makes no sense for us to give some of the richest companies that have ever existed tax breaks when Americans are struggling to get by. And I bring this up because you talked about how this is blowing holes in various state budgets. In Michigan, our schools are estimated to be underfunded by $4.5 billion, according to the Education Law Center. Even in this last budget, we saw even more money being taken from public schools to fund the roads. So my point and question here is, we've seen in Texas, the cost projection of the data centers has moved from like 100 million to about $1 billion in their state budget, according to Good Jobs First. What are the risks of states blowing holes in their state budget and then real people in the state seeing decrease in their services in terms of education or roads, et cetera? Those are huge concerns I have.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. I think those are some of the major concerns. I don't have much to add, honestly. I think that, but I think this is exactly why I'm concerned about giving out these discounted taxes for these companies when that money could be spent on something that is much more, to me, socially valuable, such as education or roads.
Well, thank you for your testimony, Dr. Green. Appreciate you taking the time and coming in today.
Thank you, everyone.
Next, we will be hearing from Tim Minotas, Legislative Director at Michigan Sierra Club. Welcome, and will you please begin when you're ready?
Can you hear me? Good? All right, awesome. Thank you, Chair Cara and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify before you all today. My name is Tim Minotas. I'm the Legislative Director for the Michigan Sierra Club. The Sierra Club, we are one of the nation's oldest and largest grassroots environmental organizations with millions of members and supporters across the nation, 150,000 of which are right here in the state of Michigan. And the work that we do is through policy advocacy, education, legal action, organizing, to ensure that we are safeguarding our clean air, water, protecting our public lands and wildlife, and holding polluters accountable. So we're here today talking about data centers. So as it relates to data centers, the Sierra Club is not only extremely concerned with the tremendous consumption of water and energy, but we are concerned about the lack of transparency in these massive corporate deals, and with Michiganders getting stuck with their costs, both as taxpayers and utility ratepayers, especially as these developments rapidly expand across the country, and big tech companies who are increasingly targeting the state of Michigan. Data centers are extraordinarily energy-intensive facilities that operate 24 hours a day, with electricity demand rivaling that of entire cities. And we heard just last week in committee that just the Stargate project within itself is going to consume as much energy as over 1 million homes. And for us, utilities and developers have not yet to commit to clear enforceable plans to avoid new fossil fuel generation by serving these massive facilities with clean energy. Without the proper guardrails, data centers could threaten and undermine Michigan's renewable energy, clean energy, and energy waste reduction laws, and instead drive the further development of polluting fossil fuel power plants, locking in emissions and costs for decades to come. Data center companies should face accelerated timelines, encouraging them to invest in distributed energy resources and energy efficiency that are proven to lower utility bills over time. This can include funding rooftop solar, storage, demand response, efficiency upgrades beyond what the utilities are already required to provide. There are also other common sense policies that could help with this, but despite the clear economic, reliability, and public benefits of these policies, outside influence from the monopoly utilities, who yield significant power over our energy policy, continue to stonewall progress. Michigan residents continue to pay some of the highest rates in the Midwest for some of the worst reliability in the nation. And this leads me to how data centers impact residential ratepayers. Even one or two large data centers can require billions of dollars in spending on new energy generation, transmission lines, distribution infrastructure, and under traditional utility regulation, these costs are typically recovered from all customers, not just the data center company. That leaves households and small businesses on the hook to subsidize highly profitable corporations through higher electric bills. In the Consumer's Energy Data Center tariff proceeding, our Sierra Club expert found that serving just a single 500 megawatt data center could lead to a 9.1% increase in residential energy rates. And this is something we are seeing across the country. This is not unique to the state of Michigan. Data centers, as we've heard, also pose serious risks to Michigan's precious water supplies. Many of these facilities rely on large volumes of water for cooling large pieces of equipment, which drains groundwater and surface water supplies. At this time, we do not have reliable public data on how much water, in particular, the proposed Stargate data center will consume, which itself highlights a problem and gap that we have in policy. In many cases, data center developers are not required to fully disclose their water use, show conservation practices, or long-term impacts, leaving both communities and regulators without the information needed to protect drinking water and nearby wells. What we do know from what we've heard from Stargate is that they are going to be using closed-loop system and that the water that they're going to be using is comparable to an office building. That claim may be accurate, but we don't have that information. But we do know from looking across the country, these hyperscale data centers are consuming about to 1 million to 5 million gallons of water per day. And that is the equivalent to about 30,000 to 50,000 homes. So data centers can also significantly, we heard earlier about the effect of the quality of life for people living nearby. Local impacts commonly include increased air pollution from diesel-powered backup generators, substantial noise pollution, especially during times of testing and power outages, which we know are pretty frequent here in the state of Michigan, especially in southeast Michigan. And they disrupt electrical grids because of the loading capacity and demand that they require, which again can raise rates. And again, depending on the location, risk to water availability via high water withdrawals. Transparency is a central problem throughout this process. Data center companies are notoriously secretive, often pressuring local officials to sign non-disclosure agreements and requiring utilities to redact large portions of filings, which we saw in the MPSC proceeding. In the example of the Saline Township project proposed by Green Chili Ventures, large portions of the contract submitted to the commission were redacted, including basic information such as the company's business address and the names and titles of contract signatories. The level of secrecy of these projects prevents meaningful public review and erodes the public trust in our regulatory system and processes. This brings me to the role of the Public Service Commission, who is charged with ensuring utilities act in the best interests of ratepayers and that rates are just and reasonable. In the case of DTE and Green Chili Adventures, they were to review 2 long-term contracts to serve a 1.4 gigawatt data center for nearly 20 years. DTE sought the ex parte approval on an accelerated 25 to 35-day business timeline. This shut down the opportunity for any discovery, cross-examination, expert testimony, and meaningful public scrutiny. State law does allow ex parte approval only if contracts will not increase costs for customers, but despite that standard, the commission approved these contracts. While conditions were included to protect ratepayers, they are vague and lack detail needed to ensure real enforceable protections. This is why the Sierra Club and our partners filed motions for a rehearing, seeking clarification and stronger enforceable safeguards. The scale of these projects, and this project in particular, demand full and transparent review, where a contested case should always be the standard. In terms of the Saline project, this would increase DTE's annual energy sales by nearly 25% and its capacity by nearly 10%, which is an extraordinary expansion. This is a massive project requiring billions of dollars in infrastructure investments. and DTE provided virtually no modeling or assumptions to support that claim that the project would not raise costs for other ratepayers, and no credible plan to serve the data center with renewable energy instead of new gas plants. And the redacted key contract provisions were kept from public view. For a project of this scale, a rushed process without full public participation or allowed intervention is definitely concerning, and it was shared by not only industrial customers, consumer advocates, environmental groups, and the majority of the 6,000 people who submitted public comment on the project. Overall, we were deeply disappointed that the Commission approved these contracts without a contested case proceeding, and believe that the MPSC failed the transparency test. While conditions included in the order acknowledge that the data center costs should not be borne by Michigan residents, there were vague and there was a lack of sufficient detail to guarantee meaningful protection. And now it's up to the Commission to strengthen those conditions in response to pending rehearing requests, and to ensure that Michigan families are not forced to subsidize multi-billion-dollar corporations at their expense. I would argue that it is also the job of the legislature to ensure this as well. Relying on the Commission to do the right thing on a case-by-case basis is not sound policy, and it should be a standard put in place across the board by the state. Now, for the Michigan Sierra Club, we oppose unchecked data center growth without transparency, environmental safeguards, ratepayer protections, and climate accountability. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Yes, thank you for coming in today, Tim. I will turn it over to Minority Vice Chair Wagella for the first question.
I have two questions, but I'll ask one and then hopefully we can come back. But so I want to ask about PFAS, so also known as forever chemicals that have been linked to all sorts of horrible things, cancer, birth defects, etc. In mid-September, the data centers are starting to use a lot of PFAS chemicals in their water systems to cool their servers. And in mid-September, the EPA actually announced it would fast-track the review of new PFAS chemicals. So my question to you is, how concerned are you about PFAS chemicals, PFAS chemicals, just broadly speaking, but with data centers specifically as well? And can you explain what those are for people to understand?
Yeah, so PFAS, these are forever chemicals that have been found in fire retardants. Pretty much anything, cookingware, furniture, you name it. And as you mentioned, the EPA in September implemented a fast-track program to review chemicals that are used in data centers. And this is concerning, especially when we're just seeing the massive build-out of these projects across the country. And I'm not even just talking about Michigan alone. With this fast tracking, there is definitely a concern that there will be limited and less rigorous oversight, which is certainly a public health and environmental problem, especially long term. We are already dealing with legacy contamination from PFAS amongst other chemicals. And with this massive just influx of data centers coming in, we are only going to be furthering, compounding the problem of the issue that we are already facing. And, I'll even go a step further, using Ohio as an example, as a state, that we all have feelings about. They're considering streamlining water discharge permits for data centers, reducing, for instance, restrictions on chemicals used to cool the data centers. So now that is a water discharging problem that is going to get into our waterways, our river streams, drinking water supplies even further. I'm not saying, obviously we don't want to do what Ohio is considering, but to your point, there is a great concern about this fast tracking that is going on at the federal level and furthering compounding the issue of these forever chemicals getting into our water supplies.
It's my understanding that many wastewater treatment plants, especially in rural areas like where I live in Southwest Michigan, aren't prepared or equipped for high volumes of water usage that could come from a data center. Are there any, unseen expenses that communities might have because of maybe having to rebuild a wastewater treatment plant?
Definitely, especially if they're pulling from groundwater or I mean, even from a municipal supply, I mean, especially if multiple data centers that are concentrated, I mean, again, we talk about energy and the amount of energy that they are using and talking about how they need to bear the full cost of the infrastructure needs for energy. We should be having that same conversation about water because they are large water users, and there are definitely going to be needs to upgrade wastewater treatment plants, water infrastructure, to meet the needs of the projects. And similarly, we should be ensuring that communities who are bearing these projects are also not on the hook to paying for the infrastructure costs that are needed for these projects. And so it could put a tremendous strain on these communities, especially with local townships who may have budgets, $300,000 to maybe just like $1 million. When we're talking about expenses for a large project like a hyperscale data center, we're talking about the millions and maybe millions and tens of millions of dollars that are needed that just cannot be borne by communities. So I would say similarly, as we talk about energy, we need to be talking about the cost of water infrastructure needs and ensuring they are paying their fair share of the cost and paying those costs and not just ratepayers.
Yep, thank you. And we'll turn it back over to Minority Vice Chair Bagella. I just want to briefly say we did start a few minutes late, so we might go just a little bit after noon today, but if we can try to keep our questions quick, it'd be much appreciated.
So, I see climate change as an existential threat to life on our planet. And last session, we were able to pass climate legislation. That legislation will require us to move towards clean energy over time. But I have concerns, and maybe you can talk a little bit about this, because in that package, there were effectively off-ramps written into the legislation to where if energy use increased significantly, it would allow the utility companies not to meet those clean energy goals. Can you talk about how this massive influx of data centers could allow for that off-ramp to trigger?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll just say, the Selene project was only it was 1.4 gigawatts, but we know in consumers' territory and DTE's territory, they are looking at another 3 to 4, 5 gigawatts of projects, coming online. That is a massive need. And to meet that demand and in such an accelerated pace, the way that the off-ramps were written is that, if there is reliability needs, infrastructure costs or delays, like they can come to the commission and ask for a delay or an extension in meeting those standards. And that is something we are incredibly concerned about, which is why we wanted that contested case so that the utilities come to the commission to show how they are going to meet our renewable and clean energy standards. We've seen reports of them already talking about building out new gas plants to meet this need. And that is exactly the wrong direction we need to be going as a state. And so the way the off-ramps are written, we have to provide affordable and reliable energy. And if our utilities are not going to be able to meet those needs, they will come to the commission and use the off-ramps to ask for that extension. And so there's a really big concern for that, yeah. And I would also just point to that, yes, we want these data centers to use renewable energy, but we need to make sure that it's an additionality. That means all the clean energy and renewable energy that we're building out shouldn't just be consumed by the data centers themselves. We need to ensure that our other businesses, industrial customers, residential customers are also utilizing that renewable energy and ensuring that it's not being just consumed by the data centers. Because at the end of the day, if we're just building out renewable energy for data centers, we're leaving a whole other sector of our economy to continue to be reliant on fossil fuels. And at the end of the day, we are not meeting our goals if we're just doing that.
All right, next question from Representative Bierlein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just kind of want to piggyback off of your comments on the water usage at the local level. So because of that, knowing the locals are going to know best how to deal with whatever requirements are being asked of them, whether it's water or land use, doesn't it make sense for things like data centers and energy production to be decided at a local level instead of, as you mentioned, the MPSC being able to override those things?
Well, I definitely do, but I also think that with it affects all customers, not just the local community. It affects the surrounding communities and all other ratepayers, especially when it comes to costs. So I would make the argument, in some cases, yes, but for the most part, our energy and water needs are also, is universal. And the need to build out further infrastructure is going to affect all ratepayers, so we all need to have a say in that power generation and those costs. So and that is what the goal of the Public Service Commission is to ensure that is protecting the public need at large.
But the Public Service Commission is solely dedicated to energy. They don't deal with water and other types of public utility.
Right.
And so
well,
why do we go back and forth as to who should make what decisions? We either believe the state should do it or we believe the locals should do it. I believe the locals should do it. We're picking and choosing when it fits our needs as to who gets to make the decision.
Yeah. And, to that point, and I will say something that is just, and I have, no opinion one way or another, what is something that is unique about the state of Michigan is that most other states' public service commissions actually also regulate their water utilities. So that's something we don't do here. To your point, we look at telecommunications and energy with the Public Service Commission and rely on more so either very localized water utilities or regional water utilities like the Great Lakes Water Authority, Southeast Michigan. And so just wanted to point out that, to your point, like that is something, is pretty unique to the state of Michigan.
Okay. One last question from Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about, I know the last session, the use and sales tax exemptions were passed for data centers. And some of us are fighting to repeal that. But can you talk about some of the ways that legislation has shortfalls and protections for our communities and things you would like to see us change in terms of, if we're going to be regulating data centers, which I think we definitely should, what are those things that we can do to make sure our communities have the correct protections in place?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think as it relates to the energy, and we are contesting this, especially with how MEDC has interpreted the sales and use tax exemption law, is that as long as there's language in the sales and use tax exemptions around meeting the clean energy standard kind of requirements for these facilities. The way that MEDC interpreted the law was that as long as they're hooking up to the utility themselves, who are supposed to be compliant to that law, that meets the standard. But we argue that within the way the law is written, that within 6 years, the company actually has to procure 90% of its energy from renewables. If you're just hooking up to the utility, we know they're going to be reliant upon fossil fuels for the next 20-some years, especially if they use the off-ramps. That for us is just the wrong interpretation. So what I do think we need is to ensure that these companies are building out and supporting and utilizing 100% of their energy needs from renewables. And that could be through various different programs. And I think same with water too. We need to ensure that they are using strong water conservation measures and protections, that they are hooking up to systems that do have excess capacity, and strong regulations around water usage. And then I think too, to the point, I think there was some shortfalls in terms of rates. There are large industrial rates. Large industrial users do get subsidized through various different rates for residential ratepayers. And I think there was a shortfall there within our tax exemption law that will still allow them to utilize some of those specialized rates. And so I think we need to be shoring those up under our laws too.
Chair, can I briefly clarify something?
Very quickly.
So just kind of recapping what you said to make sure I understand it. The data center tax use and sales tax exemption law was written so that there would be a requirement for renewable energy. However, the way that it's being interpreted by the MEDC allows essentially for the same off-ramp as the utility companies have for renewable energy. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I mean, I will just say largely, look, we opposed the legislation. We thought all the guardrails were insufficient. And so I would just say largely, both from clean energy, water, and specialized rate perspective, we thought they were still insufficient and there are loopholes in it. Clearly, even with our interpretation, we still feel like the laws could go further. But yes, to your point, we feel the way we've read it, how it was written, was that they have to procure 90% of their energy from renewables within 6 years in order to get the sales tax and use exemption. That's not how MEDC has interpreted it. And so we disagree with that interpretation.
Stargate specifically is projected to use 1.4 gigawatts of power, which, as we heard before, is equatable to 1.17 million households of power. You mentioned earlier that statewide we're looking at several gigawatts if you include all the data centers combined. Well, we only have just over 4 million houses in the state of Michigan. So to put that in context, the amount of power that we'll need to generate for data centers alone will be more than the millions of houses we have in the state of Michigan. How does that make you feel?
I mean, it makes me feel very uncomfortable, and especially, again, in a state where we pay some of the highest rates for already unreliable energy. To put that much new load onto the grid, I mean, I can't even imagine how many more power outages or other problems we are going to have with our grid. And at the end of the day, you know who loses out with more power outages? Everyday people. And so it's definitely concerning, and this is why this is a very important issue to our organization. It's one of our biggest concerns. Is around the energy use and ratepayer protection, but also our grid reliability. We rely on energy for everything, everyday needs, whether it is for computing, when it comes to refrigerator, medicine, and food. Just everyday needs for us to survive is needed. And to put this much load and strain onto our grid, I'm very concerned about what that impact can have on our state and our people.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate you taking the time to come in and testify today.
Yep, thank you.
Next, we will hear from Kristen, Meghan Kelly, and Tammy Clark, who both specialize in industrial hygiene and environmental health. Welcome, and please begin your testimony when you're ready.
Excuse me. Good morning. I am Kristen Meghan Kelly. I am a senior industrial hygienist and environmental specialist of nearly 24 years. 9 years of that working in bioenvironmental engineering in the U.S. Air Force with subspecialties in radiation safety and fetal protection. First off, thank you for allowing us here today and for rescheduling us from the snowpocalypse of last week. I will go first, and then Tammy will finish off, and then we will take your questions if you have any. For the sake of time, I'm just going to read my testimony. But my role here today is to focus on the human, health, and environmental exposure impacts that accompany this infrastructure, particularly when facilities are proposed near farms, residential communities, and schools. And I should also add, I was a senior industrial hygienist for a very large electrical utility company in Chicago, so I am very versed in the health and environmental impacts from electrical infrastructure. So I have heard today, why is this happening? I think we need to address that first. And disclose, we are not anti-AI. In fact, thousands of my ADHD screenshots are floating somewhere on the cloud, but we cannot ignore the red flag risks. And also, we always provide solutions where we identify problems. So one thing I really want you guys to understand is that this demand is not organic. There is a $300 billion contract that was signed in September of 2025, and I support AI. It's going there medically, it's going there scientifically, banking. But the issue is the demand is not there for this huge push, putting the cart before the horse and rushing to put these in. But you may be asking yourself, why is this happening so fast? Again, this has to do with binding contracts. It includes delivery timelines, minimum capacity requirements, and financial penalties if those terms are not met. And once these agreements are signed, utilities and developers face strong pressure to site facilities quickly. And they look for locations that are cheaper, that have loose zoning, and minimal resistance from the communities. Now, the proximity to existing transmission corridors, substations, waterways, and utilities, This is why the farmland in rural communities become targets. And it's not because they're the safest locations. It's because they are the fastest to obtain under the pressure from these contracts. Now, I tell people is the biggest early warning indicators a lot of time before public notice is where they're planning to put them in, is to look up where they're applying for diesel air permits, because you have to permit your emissions of diesel. Backup generators are tested regularly, emission-based and annually. And these are needed because even though they're designed to be backup generators, anytime the grid is overloaded, with Eagle, there's not a lot of guidelines in when they can put these on. And I will get more into the health hazards associated with these diesel generators, which, by the way, highly targets children, expectant mothers, and that's why I do not like these near communities or schools. But when I go into the electrical infrastructure, data centers require extensive electrical infrastructure, including transformers, both transmission push-out and receiving ends. That's called step down and step up. These systems emit extremely low frequency and electromagnetic fields continuously. Chronic exposure has been associated with sleep disruption, headaches, stress responses, and cognitive fatigue. Livestock near the high-load electrical systems have demonstrated behavioral and reproductive impacts. So proximity matters, particularly for children with developing nervous systems, and it's also to a point that much of this exposure data, now we come from an occupational world, and we are exposure scientists, and we look at what happens in the workplace and how it impacts community environmental health. But when you hear about OSHA and EPA and nuclear regulatory standards, that's based on the 95th percentile, like an average person. It does not include children or livestock. And when I talk about pregnant women, with this EMF exposure and these facilities, they emit hazardous noise, and noise is just unwanted sound. But when we're investigating noise, we have something called sound level devices. We test at the source, and on the human, on the wearer, it's called noise dosimetry. Even if it's not the definition of hazardous noise, again, these studies are based on an 8-hour time-weighted average, not 24-hour continuous exposure. Couple that from the vibration. That prevents a maternal fetal risk to the mother. I did studies with this in the United States Air Force for women that were working in administrative offices near the flight line, near F-15s. I'm actually deaf in my left ear due to that exposure. So it vibrates and it puts a higher cardiac load on the pregnant mother, and then that can put that higher heart rate for the fetus. And this is something that we cannot ignore. But when we go on to the technological trajectory, when I talk about the solutions, it is important to note that this industry is evolving. And there are existing hyperscale facilities all over the world, including certain Bitcoin mining operations. And what these Bitcoin mining operations do, they're like ahead of the curve. And there is a company based out of Poland where they have taken these mining, they're very similar to AI data centers, but a little bit smaller. But there are AI data centers in Europe. They're taking them and they're putting them underground, and they're using cooling liquids. And then from the heat generated from that process, they're creating thermal energy. A lot of the energy demand is based on heat, and I'm a skier, so I think about Boyne. I'm like, they should just put a little Bitcoin mining operation to heat their pool. So although I'm joking, my point is it can create thermal energy. My understanding, this is actually being done in Chicago. So you can do this better and you can do it safer. So again, I am not against putting in AI data centers, but I think we need to pause and ask ourselves, how can we do this with the best engineering controls in place that provide not only a safer outcome, but you have talked about the creation of jobs, you've talked about the impacts on technology. There are better ways to do it, and it has been around for about 10 years. So why these large corporations like OpenAI and Oracle are just rushing to do this, again, has to do with their binding contracts. And I do not believe that that is a load that we, the people of Michigan, should have to bear when, again, that demand is not needed. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members, for accommodating us. Like Kristen said, I was stuck in a highway closure and stranded in a hotel last week, so I couldn't get here. But my name is Tammy Clark, and I'm an industrial hygienist, an occupational and environmental health and safety professional with over 20 years of working in the fields of anticipating, recognizing, evaluating, and controlling both health and human hazards for environmental situations, occupational situations, community public situations. It's our job to make sure that occupational situations, the public at large, and our environment is healthy and safe from any particular exposures that may be happening or people, plants, or animals may be exposed to. I have taught at the university level. I currently own my own health, safety, and regulatory consulting firm, and I have clients all over the country who are, extending from healthcare facilities, manufacturing facilities, industrial facilities, commercial agriculture farms, and construction firms. So I work in a wide variety of different settings. And as a public health professional, when I saw what was happening, and it really only came to my attention about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, what was happening, this mad rush for these hyperscale data centers to be built in Michigan, I really took a step back and thought, whoa, what are we doing? And why are we doing it in this manner? Do people not realize the negative health and environmental impacts that are going to stem from this? Most of them that will be irreparable. We need to really slow our roll here, and that's how I got involved in this and decided to stand up and use my voice of expertise, experience, and credentialing as an environmental health specialist on this issue. And again, like Kristen said, we have spoken and testified in legislative bodies and in court cases all the way to the United States Supreme Court on different issues. And when we saw this, we realized we need to get involved because most people have no idea. They are not educated on these issues. They're only hearing one-sided issues or one-sided information from lobbyists and data center executives, and it's very misleading. And we know because we work in these industries and we work in these fields. We work with very large industrial companies, manufacturing, industrial settings, commercial, you name it, across the board. This is nothing new for us. But what is new is the rate and the speed at which this is being done and pushed on people with very false and misleading information. When people have come back to me and said, even legislators have said, well, Tammy, that's not the information I'm getting. And that's why I decided to stand up and testify on this, because I know you're getting false and misleading information from lobbyists and executives who are paid to push the information on you and sell their product. Okay, and what that is stemming from, like Kristen said, it is stemming from the contracts that they have with OpenAI to build and provide a certain number of facilities and a certain number of computation and technological outputs in a certain amount of time, or they stand to lose billions of dollars. Well, I'm sorry, but their contracts are not our problem. And we do not need to put our communities, our townships, and our cities, our health, and our environment at great risk to help them satisfy their contracts. That's really what a lot of this comes down to. So I'm not going to go over, we printed out our notes because we thought we just had a very short amount of time, and for the sake of your time, I'm not going to review all of the environmental things that have already been covered last week and this week, but I want to leave you with some suggestions and some thoughts. I would encourage all of you to look at gubernatorial candidate Tom Leonard's his petition that he's got circulating, and I'm asking my legislative friends to please sign it. It's calling for a 1-year moratorium on any new data centers in Michigan, and the reason I believe that's very important is because we need to take a step back and we need to slow our roll before we create some very serious negative and irreparable human and environmental health hazards and harms that we're going to have a hard time stepping back from and that are not necessary. That will give us time to create a task force of professionals like environmental engineers, occupational and environmental health professionals, environmental experts like Kristen and I, even real estate experts to help identify, like Representative Green said, the siting is the most important thing here. We can talk about the tax issues and we can talk about other things, but in my opinion, as a health expert, the siting is really the most important and critical issue for me to protect people in Michigan and our environment, our Great Lakes and our aquifers. So we need to do a deep dive in this. It can be done. Listen, I'm not against technology, like I already said. I'm not against these AI data centers. I'm very against them in the locations where they are proposing or potentially proposing them to be built. So let's slow our roll. Let's sign this 1-year moratorium, and let's develop a task force of experts who can identify the most appropriate locations, maybe Superfund sites, abandoned brownfields, abandoned industrial areas. Now, here's the other part of this. It's going to require us to put 100% of the responsibility on the multi-billion-dollar company wanting to come in and build for, number one, remediation of that land. They're called Superfund and brownfield sites for a reason. They're contaminated. It's going to require some money to remediate that soil. That's okay. They can easily afford it. It's pennies to them. They should be responsible 100% for the development or the redesign of the existing infrastructure. The infrastructure, a lot of these facilities, is very old and outdated and is not capable of handling the potential energy load. So they're going to need to rebuild the infrastructure. That should be on them. We also need to put the responsibility on them for providing their own source of energy, not relying on our already outdated, stressed, overloaded electrical grid. There are many new, as Kristen mentioned, technological advances. Most, or if not all, of the data centers in Europe are already operating this way, and many, even Microsoft in some of the states where they have built, where the states have required them to through legislative means, they are already using alternative solutions, alternative cooling solutions that exist, underground, geothermal, alternative liquid, dielectric systems that do not rely on our water. But why are they coming here, and why are they so fast and furious for Michigan, for our water? And because they've really been given the keys to the state. So we need to stop that, and we need to take a step back, and we need to put all the requirements on them to do it right. We can do this, but we need to do it responsibly and ethically. This is a moral and ethical issue for us in our fields that we can see coming. In addition, as we wrap up, we also need to remember that these data scales and the technology is rapidly emerging. Within a few years, they're talking about putting them in outer space where they will be 100% solar powered. I don't doubt that's coming. Within a few years, they will be under the seabed like China has theirs. So what happens when these massive campuses abandon, leaving these little farming towns with massive campuses that they have no way to properly remediate? So we need to put 100% of that responsibility on the company as well. If you abandon this campus, if you go to something else as an alternative method, it has to be written into their contract language that they then remediate that land and return it and restore it to its original value and its original position to best protect the people, the citizens, the townships, the character of our farming communities. So this can be done, but it's going to take some strategy. It's going to take a little time. It's going to take a little thought, working together. And so I just want to leave you with the encouragement that they're doing it in Europe properly. They're doing it safely, and they're doing it effectively. It's going to take some time, some money, and some strategy, but let's get it right before we create permanent human and environmental damage. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you both for your testimony. It's very informative. My first question is for Kristen. You're talking about the continuous EMF exposure and how the frequencies have negative impacts on livestock and their offspring. Do you believe that those impacts would also have a negative externality on humans?
Absolutely. So to give a background, in an occupational setting, anything over 85 decibels in an A-weighted average is considered hazardous noise, and that invokes either engineering controls or personal protective equipment like earmuffs and plugs. Anytime, like when you go to a concert, you're over 112, that can cause instantaneous harm to the cilia in your ear and cause hearing loss. That's what happened to me, even with earring protection. Now, when you're talking about these data centers at the source, they can range on average between 75 and 95 dBA. So if you're working in there, you absolutely will be wearing hearing protection. Sometimes after the fact, they have to put in engineering controls because it's louder for the community. Now, when you talk about like noise levels and the human and environmental impact, and when I say environmental, I'm not talking about the dirt. Environmental health is public health. So when you're out in the community, depending on how far it is, I would need to do an assessment. It averages around 50 to 65. And the problem is at night, when your central nervous system is at its call phase, actually that noise, not yet hazardous, when mixed with the low frequency vibration, creates a systemic effect, a compounding exposure, and it exacerbates what that noise would do to your body, even though not deemed hazardous. So I don't want to get into the weeds. I can give you more information. I've actually done personal studies on this. So yes, it is very harmful, again, especially to developing brains in the frontal lobe of children and to expectant mothers.
Thank you. Next question from Representative Bierlein.
Thank you, Chair. And my question was right along those same lines. So before this, I was a county commissioner in the Thumb. Half of the state's wind production comes from the Thumb. We have over, I think, around 800 wind turbines. And I've heard all of those things that you just said about the health concerns, about noise and vibration, and then watched as government officials have laughed at people and told them they don't know what they're talking about. Would you be willing to meet up with some of those folks from the Thumb area that still have those concerns as future wind and solar development is happening to talk about the risks?
Absolutely, and if you don't mind me to expand what you just said, in our profession, a lot of our fights we're told, you are not doctors. Well, actually, we train doctors on universal precautions and exposure controls, and in an occupational setting, occupational health practitioners look to people like us, the exposure scientists, to determine the best accommodations for their patients in an occupational setting. So a lot of times, the data we share, they go, you're not a doctor. You have to understand, doctors treat. Our job is to protect. And being a veteran too, I take this very seriously because of what I did in the Air Force. So if you would like to connect with me, you can do that through the chairman, who we scheduled this with, his staff. I will absolutely help the community.
Thank you very much.
What type of contamination can be expected from data centers?
There's a lot of contamination because you've probably all heard the term closed loop system. Microsoft in particular is trying to sell everybody, the legislative body, that from what I've heard, on their closed loop systems. Don't let that fool you. There's really no such thing as a closed loop system. It's still picking up water. That water in a closed loop system is being contaminated. It's picking up anti-corrosives, anti-scaling agents, biocides, and then what is happening is that water gets what's called blowdown. It gets blown back down into the aquifers or the rivers, or like what Ohio EPA is just right now allowing, they just dump it right back into the river. The water treatment facilities are not capable, they do not have the filtering media, and they are not capable of filtering those particular types of corrosives. And so that just makes its way down into our aquifers, and most of these communities are small towns and farming communities that have wells set on aquifers. So this water it's this gray sludge basically is not being cleaned, it's not being filtered, and it's being dumped right into our drinking water, or it's being dumped into a water treatment facility center that cannot handle that kind of load. And so this is a real problem.
Absolutely, and one of the most precious things we have in America is valuable soil for farming. And particularly in Michigan, we also have a whole lot of fresh water. Those are two wonderful things. And your point about emerging technology and whether data centers can be put at outer space or other types of avenues to consider, we're just years away from that. And so what is the rush that we're so desperate that we just need to pump all these data centers on society so quickly and strain the energy grid? That is something that I think we definitely should be taking seriously as a society and looking into. Do you have any quick remarks back on that before we close?
Yeah, the rush has to do with contracts that they need to fulfill, not with the need for more data centers. So let's be real clear about that. Now, technology is emerging and we're going to need more data centers. We're not arguing that point, but we do not need nearly the amount that they are proposing. We do not need nearly the level of what is coming at us. And like you said, Chair Carr, I appreciate that comment because we've been saying the same thing. The technology is changing so quickly that it won't be long and this facility will be under construction, and some of these hyperscale centers take 5 years to build. Before it's even built, the technology is going to change. That company is going to abandon that plan and leave a small farming community completely damaged with this huge, massive campus that they don't know what to do with. And so this is why we're saying, if we're going to do this, we need to keep them away from communities for health reasons, and then we need to put 100% of the responsibility on the company for any abandonment or any unfulfillment issues contractually to remediate that back to its original land value.
I would
Last word, go ahead.
I would just like to add that when it comes to this advancement of technology, remember, even though the technology is new, we have existing We do after-action reports in our profession. We can already look to where there are hyperscale AI data centers and things that we have seen when you're dealing with the vibration, I want to go back to that, and the EMF exposure from these increase in transformers. It can increase suicide rates. It has psychological and physiological impacts. And there are certain communities where they've already had to move their whole families to the basement and create their own engineering and barrier controls for the family to sleep on a giant California king in the basement, to include changing of windows, to where the data centers had to go back and raise the stacks of the fans and after the fact engineering control. And when we rush these facilities, shortcuts are made, just like in home construction. When you rush things, corners are cuts. And when we're talking about facilities that use the amount of power and energy and resources as a military installation, we've got to do our due diligence, pause, and do it correctly.
Absolutely, very good. And I just can't help but think of how much people are delayed permits from Deagle, and it takes them so long. Yet here we are rushing so fast on these data centers for the big guys. So it certainly is a big contrast. I appreciate you two coming in today. I am looking forward to taking up Representative Pahutsky's idea of having some of the companies come in themselves. So OpenAI, Oracle, Related Digital, would love to hear from them. We've been reaching out to them. Haven't heard back yet, but we will continue to press and try to get them in here to talk to us directly. Seeing no further business from the committee, we stand adjourned.